I was interested uh, just to hear 2 Corinthians 10 and how do you see it slotting in to the book as a whole? Because we've had sort of the chapters 8 and 9, Paul revitalizing the support for Jerusalem Christians.
Mm.
And then it's like a return to a topic that's been going on a fair bit, the conflict in Corinth, and then the super apostle group, which aren't named here yet, but they're referred. I was just curious to hear your like big picture lens. Like, what do you see Paul doing in 2 Corinthians 10?
Yes, I think at this point he pivots to defend what he's been doing. The only way that makes sense is if he's talking to his direct opponents, the ones who've been fighting against him, the small faction in the church that is wanting to, back those super apostles rather than Paul. And so it feels like a massive gear change to the rest of the book. A little bit like the gear change when he starts singing their praises after Titus rocks up, as though there's something happened in between the two chapters. I think he's now wanting to address very clearly, again, probably for the third or fourth time in the book, what he's on about, what he is seeking to communicate, and again, leaning into his influence as an apostle. Like he has the ability to exercise power and authority, but instead he stays in that influence lens, which like I quite like that about Paul.
Yeah.
He doesn't go, it's my way or the highway. He leads into his inner Presbyterian and just seeks to influence everyone. Which I quite like the way that he speaks in that space.
Yeah. Did you hear him? Is he being ironic in verse 1 where he's kind of saying, by the humility and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you? Like, is that deliberately sort of undermining their perception of behind the pen, you're bold as all get out, but because like that is by the humility and gentleness of Christ,
there's a couple of weird things happening there because he is, and he then goes on to the timidity and boldness is the same language that he's using, and so I think there is dripping irony through this particular section, but the "I appeal to you" is actually it's a power word, not necessarily just influence, and so he's alluding to gentleness and humility, but then he's actually using a not quite I compel you, but remembering who I am, I appeal to you. But he doesn't ground that in apostolic authority. He grounds that in the gentleness of Christ. And I think he's trying to remind them that you don't always have to be a belligerent tool in the way that you communicate. And just because you have authority doesn't mean you need to actually be rude and obnoxious and direct or bold is the language of the passage. And so when Paul chooses to be gentle in person when he's with the Corinthians, Paul's doing that intentionally because of that relational lens and the fact that he's actually planted the church. He has relationships with people. But I think his opponents in Corinth actually see that gentleness in person as weakness rather than as deliberate humility. And I think that's shown clearly. The word timid that the NIV puts inverted commas around, the word behind that is in the humility space. But when you negatively frame it, humility becomes timidness. And so, look, I do think there's massive amounts of irony in there. That Paul is trying to go, this is what you say. And this is why you're right a little bit, but actually you're completely missing the points. And then he goes on to expound on that later on.
I found it bizarre too, because, like, is it even true that he's, like wimpy faced? Like, Paul doesn't come across in the other encounters you see him as a timid guy. Like, he's quite courageous, quite willing to like suffer physically. I don't sort of picture him, and especially given, I guess, 2 Corinthians was written off the back of a a visit that he called painful,
Mm.
like it didn't. I think I was reading it going, does the charge even stick?
Yeah, I think it's not so much a comment on Paul himself, but a comment on the behaviour and operation of the super apostles. So it's my assumption, and we don't have heaps to go on, but it's my assumption that super apostles roll into town and they use charisma and eloquence in the way that they present their information, which is most of the time a crock. Like it's false teaching. Paul locates it in that space. But they speak with power and authority in the way that they come in and address the Corinthian church. Whereas Paul, I don't think he would be intentionally crafting his narrative in making it sound nice as he delivers it.
Yeah.
My assumption is he's just going, look, this is the truth, and he appeals to, remember when me and Lois hashed it out over this thing back then, and now we're okay. Let's chat about whatever's going on here.
Yeah.
In that more interpersonal and relational metric that I could see if you wanted to have a crack at Paul, you'd be looking for any opportunity to undermine his authority. And I think what this is alluding to is the method of delivery that he's using is not the suave. He doesn't have like a backing track as he walks onto stage and the smoke machine going and saying, give it up for Paul the super apostle.
Yeah.
He's actually appealing to the gospel, to their existing relationships, to obedience. They're the kinds of things that aren't necessarily flashy in the way they're presented, but they are for the sake of the Corinthian church being more like Christ. And I can see how the opponents would be poking in at that to go, well, come on, who would you rather listen to? Would you rather listen to the flashy, fun super apostle, or Paul? All Paul ever does is make us change, give up the things we like doing, change the way that we operate. I'd much rather listen to the guy that says what our soothing ears want to hear. That those super apostles, they're scratching the itch just the way we like it. And we don't have to change. We can just continue living our lives as we did in the pagan way or in the Jewish tradition or whatever it is that the person in that Corinthian faction wishes to live their life as. Paul obviously is, well, no, that's not how you live. Live the way that Christ lived. Live out our discipleship journey in a way that dies to self to serve others, which is why it would be. No, sorry. If I was trying to attack Paul's ministry and I was in the Corinthian church, that's where I'd be pushing to try and undermine his authority. Which I think is why, this sounds very different to early Galatians, right?
Yeah.
So, like, you foolish Galatians, what has bewitched you? What has deceived you?
Yeah.
That's very direct and bold to use the Corinthian language. But he doesn't actually lean into that space. Because I think that actually undermines the narrative that he's actually trying to correct. Because flashiness and boldness is not a sign of godliness, as much as the message itself is what carries the gospel in this space. And so he has no problems calling out sin. He's done that
totally
through a bunch of different letters. But in the Corinthian church here, he's specifically taking a particular tone to undermine the people that are just trying to destroy his credibility. And I just continually see him leaning into influence rather than power. Even though he could lay the hammer down very simply.
Yes.
I think also the painful letter and the painful visit. My general assumption is that the boldness was probably we had a crack at boldness last time. That didn't seem to work, and so he's pivoting to gentleness and timidness, as they say.
Pastoral. It feels like quite a reflection on his pastoral approach because, like you've been saying, and I guess it is more clear in chapter 11 when he does, that's where we get they are false teachers. I guess we haven't been given that info yet, but we know he winds up calling them out as false teachers. So that enters that space where you do wonder, well, we've seen Paul encounter false teaching like in Galatians and there's no holds barred. It's, yeah, like you said, it's straight to the point and
Yeah.
why you're so quick to abandon the gospel. He kind of winds up in a not dissimilar place by the end of the letter, but it's just we've got a whole lot of like pastoral massaging happening all the way through that I guess, yeah, ironic, I guess, I assume, the very approach that he's taking as pastoral is they're picking at that itself, going, you know, you're soft with us. We kind of resonate a bit too with that charge of like, oh, they're just a keyboard warrior, people online who talk smack and talk big. But then, you know, if you met them face to face, you go, oh, gee, there's nothing to you at all. So it's a very ancient criticism, I guess, that one. To say, yeah, when you got your parchment, you're very, very robust with, but in face to face, you've got nothing.
Yeah. I feel like if you're in the Corinthian church, you read the letter, you're like, man, I'm grabbing the popcorn because I really want to see how this guy's going to lay down the law.
Yeah.
And so I could see how there might be a level of disappointment in the Corinthian church when Paul comes in a meek and lowly way. Even though, like, we did Lord's Supper yesterday as well, we're reminded of Jesus' invitation to take on his yoke because it's easy and light. And in that he's like, I am gentle and lowly, and the invitation is in that space. And so, yeah, Paul is channeling his inner Jesus in that meekness and lowliness and pastoral nature as he addresses these serious concerns. He doesn't let them go uncorrected, but the method and the message are not the same. And he's had the painful letter. He's now in this more gentle space. I think it shows the pastoral range of Paul and how he genuinely can be all things to all men because different scenarios require different approaches, different pastoral sensitivities, but he always keeps at the centre of his mind how to help these people become more like Jesus. Have been obedience, like obedience and disobedience flow up 3 or 4 times through the passage as a really, he never wavers from that, even when he's being harsh or gentle. That's the obedience to Christ is central in what he's seeking to give the recipient of whatever letter he's writing to work towards.
I marvel at his, I guess, just his perspective, if that's the way to put it, just to see in this conflict, perhaps potentially the temptation or the pathway to abandon his approach and I guess pick up weapons of the world. Like he has sort of that principle of we live in the world, but we don't fight the way the world does. And I guess he's guarded about the fact that they're provoking, I guess, he could reach for a certain way of being with them or lean into his status or position or his authority, and he could pick up, I assume they're the kind of weapons he's envisaging in a sense of to fight the way the world does in that cutthroat dog eat dog sort of way.
Yeah, it reminds me of Israel in the Old Testament in the way that they were fighting. So particularly, we did Judges, not all that recently, but recently enough, where they're going out to fight. God's going before them and fighting their battles. They're holding their swords and stuff as almost ornamental because it's God's the one who's going out and fighting. They're holding on to their weapons of the world, but God's actually the one that's fighting for them. And rather than actually leaning into the fact that God is supporting them, we get all those stories about how they go up in their own strength. Oh, don't send everyone. We only need a couple of people because there's actually not very many people up on the hill. And God allows them to be absolutely smashed because, guys, you're not fighting with the weapons of the world. You're fighting with me. I'm the one who goes out before you. And then it plays out in like their request for a king, just like all the other nations. You go, guys, we're not like every other nation. We are set apart for God. And God is the one who fights our battles. And then they get their king, then they go to exile. Like the yearning of the human heart and that totally depraved nature makes us yearn to be just like everyone else. And Paul here, I feel like he's channeling thousands of years of Israelite history.
True.
And going, guys, remember, from the beginning, we've never, like even in the garden, right? Adam and Eve have got fellowship with God. They've got everything they could ever desire, but instead they try and pick up the weapons of the world in seeking to have knowledge from God, and that ends disastrously. And then you go, all right, so the next generation can be better. No, Cain and Abel, look, that's sinful nature. Rather than trusting God and his providence, what do? We pick up the stone and try and crush the skull of our brother. Like, there's just this awful repetitive pattern of sinful human history where we continuously reach for the weapons of this world to destroy. And Paul goes, guys, we don't have the weapons of the world. We destroy all arguments against whatever it is. And he doesn't specifically name what the arguments are because it's irrelevant. Like God wins, right?
Yeah.
I play this game with my kids with cards. Yeah. And I go, we're going to play a game. I'm not going to tell you the name of it. And we're going to keep playing until you figured out what the name of this game is. And they go, okay, that's weird. And I put 2 cards down and I go, oh, ace and a 7. 7 is red, Davo wins. Yeah. Put another card down. Oh, ace high, Davo wins. Davo wins. And eventually they go, oh, okay, the name of the game is Davo wins. Doesn't matter what's going on the board, Davo always wins in this game. And like Paul's doing the same thing. Yeah. It's like, doesn't matter what cards you try and play in these arguments going on, God always wins. God is victorious. He blows on people and they fall over. It doesn't need to be this. It's not this arm wrestle where we're equipping ourselves with human tools and you're equipping yourselves with human tools and we fight to see who's going to win. Yeah. The result is already predetermined. God is the winner. Yeah. And there's very little we can actually do about that. And so Paul doesn't waste time on articulating the arguments and why they're stupid. He's just like, we're on God's side. Yeah. God will defeat these arguments. Yeah. And then channels right in verse 11, where he's like, and so you'll be tested. Is it obedience or disobedience? Disobedience will be punished once your obedience is complete. Which, I'm 50-50 on. I think there's kind of irony there in terms of, asking this faction, like, what is your obedience to? What is it that you're actually channeling as you're arguing this? Who's the authority behind what you're saying? Because it's clearly not God. Like, who are these super apostles? What's the spiritual force behind these super apostles? I don't think you'll like the answer when you actually drill down into what's going on. Yeah. And so your obedience to these super apostles will be counted as disobedience to God. And what's the result in that? Yeah. It's punishment. And so I feel like the faction, as they hear this letter read, are kind of quaking in their boots going, have we backed the wrong horse? Yeah.
I love it. Well, I like where you pivoted to there. That's a great illustration, picking up the thread of all that temptation of the heart to reach for the sword. Peter does that in the garden, like in the time of, I guess it's a principle of the human, being that in a time of crisis will reach for the power mechanism that can give us the control that we long for. And I take it that Paul is alert to that temptation and instead sees that behind the obstacles and the friction that we're encountering here, there is actually a spiritual battle at play. And that's the battle I'm fighting, but it's like God's divine power that demolishes strongholds. Like we've got spiritual weapons at our disposal, but it's God's divine power that has its effect. And I kind of just marvel at his capacity to resist, like when the pressure is on. And I guess just thinking of what our world's like today, when you see churches or leadership disputes play out sort of over like the online space, and people are pretty quick to just play out the battle according to the way the world does it, like slander and all sorts. Straw man their argument, like all sorts to just whatever to win. Like I just see Paul taking a very different tack, because we are fighting a spiritual battle, and therefore we'd be foolish to try to play it out on the world's like winning the turf war of the world counts for nothing. Which I almost feel like there is probably an application of this to how we think about Christianity playing itself in a political space. Like there is a principle there that we do live in the world. So okay, the call of gospel communities isn't to withdraw or retreat or be in a monastic kind of isolated group, but there's a certain way that we engage the world that's asymmetrical. It's not like for like or eye for eye. Like, and I just see him modeling something of that in this.
Yeah, I think it comes down to what your attitude is towards the role of the church and society, because depending on your philosophy of ministry, it actually adjusts the way that you interact. I mean, we've had like the seeker-sensitive movement of the 90s and the noughties, which has grown in popularity. It's waned a little bit in popularity recently. What's the function of the church? Is it to disciple believers? Is it to be an outreach to outsiders? And I mean, I say yes, both. But where do you prioritize? Is everything so everything so dumbed down so that it's always accessible and every component is accessible to the outsider who hasn't met Jesus, has no biblical understanding or knowledge, and is just a complete outsider? Versus how do we mature the person who's been a faithful follower of Jesus for 60 or 70 years? I actually think it's the responsibility of the church to cater to, look after, love, disciple and train both individuals, both the complete newbie and the absolute person that's been there for 60, 70, 80 years. But that actually, that does change the way that you approach how your church functions in that particular space. And so as you seek to engage with whatever the latest issue is, if you are completely seeker-sensitive minded, whatever colour your logo is on social media, which seems to be the way that every organisation aligns with whatever the latest issue is on society. I don't care what the issue is. It's just like, all right, social media logos are changing. There must be something going on. What is the current issue that all society wants us to be thinking about? If you're a completely seeker-sensitive church, you're going to be changing your logo because you're wanting to make sure you don't isolate someone and prevent them from coming in the door. And whilst I appreciate the heart of wanting to remove barriers to the gospel, chapter 6 said we remove barriers from the gospel. I think there's something helpful about that posture. When you completely are susceptible to the whim of society as it goes through various issues all of the time, you're distracted by the irrelevance and failing to actually prioritise the long-term discipleship of your people. And so, look, I unapologetically, I won't change the logo of our church for whatever issue pops up, even if it's a good one. Like, sometimes society is advocating for really important messages that need to be heard, and I'll happily listen to what's going on and support good causes. But to be completely locked into this what feels like a 3-month cycle of what we're supposed to care about is a complete distraction from getting on with obedience to Christ, that's what Paul is really pushing us towards.
Yes.
And so I'd love to see us as a church. I'd love to see churches in general have confidence in the gospel such that when the latest issue pops up, and even if society comes after the church because they fundamentally disagree with the gospel position that's been well established for 2,000 years, that we just hold the line and you go, look, this is the gospel. We unapologetically trust the word of God. We're not going to be swayed by what the Forbes top 100 companies think is important this week. Let's actually lock into what the gospel demands of us, and not be so worried about. As I think they are the weapons of the world. Right? Keep people distracted into a cycle of keyboard worrying about all sorts of issues. To distract us from what's really going on. The total depravity of mankind, our distraction from the Lord Jesus and his sovereign reign over his creation, and pushing us in all sorts of stupid directions that have absolutely no impact on our lives eternally. They might change a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of years in this creation. But in the scope of eternity, God doesn't care what colour our logos are on social media. And that's really going to be inconsequential in eternity. And so, I think focus at that point is absolutely critical.
It's a pretty, I guess, as a like that caution or warning for any church. Just if your like ministry vision is dispersed across all these social, cultural problems that we have to address or fight for, or we end up just watering down what we're actually on about. And I can only imagine someone like Paul is on. I'd love to write 3 Corinthians to you, where we actually get to talk about your ministry and your mission together as God's people. Like, that's the letter I'd love to. That's the conversation I'd love to be having with you. How's the mission going in Corinth? Like, it's quite noticeably absent from the letter. Not because it doesn't matter, but because there's so many barriers to them actually being able to re-engage with, we're the aroma of Christ in this place. What are people smelling, kind of thing.
Which I think that lands in that last section, kind of verse 12 to 18.
Oh, yes.
16, where he's saying, where we boast in Christ. If you want to boast, that's the right location of our boasting. So it's not let's boast in who we are or what we've done or all sorts of stuff that, like, look how good I am, I've done X, Y, Z. Paul's going, look, fundamentally, even if you do good things, the location of that goodness or the source of that goodness is God's providence, and he has actually enabled you to go and do good things for his sake. And so if you want to boast in those good things that have been allocated to you, which he doesn't say, well, actually give credit where credit's due. Credit's not in our skills and abilities. Even if we do wonderful things, they actually belong to the Lord. And so as we boast in the good things that happen, let's boast in the Lord, not in ourselves. Because who is approved in the end? It's those who God has approved. It's not those who give themselves.
Commend themselves.
It's not those who commend themselves. It's those who God commends that are approved.
Yeah, that's a good call. I guess actually Paul's heart there is very clearly missional. His example and what he's feeding them is like, our long is not only that we'll be able to grow the sphere of activity we have among you, but we want to preach the gospel continually to regions beyond you. That right there is Paul's missional heart.
I think there's one last cheeky jibe there that he gives to the super apostles, where he says, I don't want to go and preach where someone else has already had a harvest. Because why would we do that? If God's allocated a region to someone else to go and preach, let them go and preach there. And I think he's just, again, reminding the Corinthian church, like, hey, guys, God enabled me to plant your church, and I've been discipling you. Who are these blow-ins that are coming in and causing chaos where that was actually the turf that I had occupied? We'd love to go further, but we can't get there yet because there's still all these issues that are unresolved. Pull your head out so that we can actually get on with going to the ends of the earth. And I like it's unstated there, but I think Paul's clearly got Rome in his mind. He's like, guys, I just want to get to Rome. Let's go and convert the emperor so this can go massive. But why are we still stuck in these little things? And so, Paul's like, this is our turf, without saying you belong to us. He's like, we've preached the gospel here. You've given your lives to Christ. You are the centre of what's going on here. You need to start acting like the faith that you've expressed already in Jesus, actually living that out. Don't get distracted by, like, we've already dealt with this stuff already. Don't let some blow-in false teacher distract you from the gospel. Let's get on with it, so I can get on and get to Rome and continue this this missional apostolic ministry that I've got, and you can be part of that too. So it's a big chapter, and I do think it's helpful how Paul's now going to pivot and flesh out all the details that we've kind of been hanging out for up to this point in 2 Corinthians. We've kind of been alluding to it, but we kind of get those concrete details. So I'm looking forward to seeing where Paul takes us next week.